We're delighted to have three panelists this afternoon, two longtime retired priests and a religious who I regard myself as a good friend of. So we have Sister Mary Paul, Holy Family of Nazareth, and besides her, they say the two priests said that's two thorns between, with a rose in between. So for the Henry Petter was a pastor of a very large parish and retired, St. Anne's in Coppell, Texas. And for the Tom Cloherty was also a pastor, a long-time pastor. And for the Cloherty's case, we in the University of Dallas Serra Club know him well because he was our chaplain. And so I'll pose well, first of all, I'll tell you the subject is, as advertised, encouraging religious vocations in the parish. In parish, we'll include also the religious community. So I'll pose the question and see where it goes from there. And all three of the panelists have a wealth of experience they can draw on to add to the question and elaborate. We will have, this is a 1 hour long session. The question that I'll pose is to the panelists, and we'll let Father Petter, since he seems to be the senior of the panelists, we'll let Father Petter respond first, and then the other two, at their own speed and inclination, will take up. So the first question is, in your parish or religious community work, have you ever actually counseled a youth, either male or female, regarding a religious vocation? And if so, how did you do that? Did you follow some kind of a matrix, or do you invent something, or you just kind of wing it? So, Father Petter, want to respond?
Well, first point of clarification, as far as being the senior here, I think I'm older than Father Tom, but I'm not older than him when you count number of years of ordination. So I was ordained in 76, and you were ordained in 74. So he's really my senior as far as ordination is concerned. But I am and look a whole lot older than he does. He is. And Sister, of course, just became a nun a few years ago. So that's a whole other story. To answer the question, I think a lot of it depends on who it is that comes to me. If someone's in high school and they come to me, basically I interview them and talk with them, and maybe they are senior or junior. Then there are times when I have maybe monthly sessions with them. I try to get them, if they're not already involved, I try to get them more involved in parish life. Maybe even choose them to be a member of the parish council if that works well for them, so they kind of get to know who the church. I might invite them to the rectory for a lunch with the other priests and things like that. If it's an older person, maybe they're in college or maybe they're working and they're single, they come around and talk with me. First of all, it's good for me to know, to have known them, for them to already be in leadership. If they're asking me or telling me that they're interested in the priesthood, I'm going to have to write a recommendation for them. So it's going to be important for me to, in the recommendation, say, he already exhibits some kind of leadership in the parish. I've known him for a few years. If they're just coming in and I don't know them, then I say, you know what? Get yourself more established in the parish. Get yourself more involved in leadership so that you can be a lector, you can be an usher, any of those things, so that the parish family can start getting to know you, and I can start getting to know you, so that and it's not just because I have to write a letter of recommendation. It's so that we can watch and see who he is and what he's all about, whether he's going to be really and truly interested. So that's the short of my answer right now.
Well, I will say that I'm a catechist, an RCIA person in the parishes that I've worked at. So the people that I actually helped, I knew them through that process. And I'm going to, the question is, how did you do so? How did you counsel them? They didn't keep coming back to me. It was just a little interaction, and I think I'm summarizing what I reflected on, is that I invited them to the next vocation event that was available. Now, I'm going to do a little bragging. I think here in Dallas-Fort Worth, we have the best Serrans in the whole country. I don't know where all the rest of you are from, but we have a lot of, well, besides the pandemic, we had a lot of events. Not only the Vocation Awareness Program in the summer, but our diocese had events, Marian dinner for young women, all sorts of different things. So I found that the best thing I could do was invite them to the next thing coming up. And some of them went to it, and that really helped them. When I looked at who I helped more men than women. I think women would be fearful to talk to me because, oh no. But the men, like, they're not afraid that I'm going to influence them one way or another. I can just be an open listener. And so that's what I will say. I invited them to the next great event that was being hosted in our diocese, whether it was Serra sponsored, whether it was diocese sponsored, whether it was my religious community. We tried to get on to see that things worked when you had them regularly and you could invite them to the next event. That's, I think, was key in my experience.
Sister, don't you have I call it a sleepover, but don't you have a weekend event?
Yes, about 4 times a year we have discernment weekends for young women who are already young adults, 18 and up. In the past we had them with high school, but we kind of moved to the young adult area. And maybe I'll just say this one thing. When I was at Immaculate Conception, there was a young man who was wanting to be confirmed, and he came around to the parish, but you know how young adults are, they're very busy. So I didn't see him for a while. So I thought, well, I know his address, I'm just gonna drive by his house and see what happens. And he was out in the front yard doing something, and I said, "Hi, Elmer. I want to help you get confirmed. How can I make it easier for you?" And he did end up getting confirmed at Immaculate Conception, and later he got very involved with young adults. And at Santa Clara Parish, I saw him as a catechist there, and then he's a priest today. So I'm very happy that I went to his house and invited him to be confirmed.
Well, I think something Sister said, just a personal invitation, and not always from a priest, for you in your own parishes, when you're at Mass or when you're, when at daily Masses, weekend Masses, when you see young people involved. Maybe it's through the RCIA or catechism, something of that nature. When you see them involved, that opportunity to really place a thought before them of, have you thought about a vocation? So you shouldn't always leave it up to just the priest or the religious. You have a very active role in all of that as well. I am the product of being familiar with Serra from 1966 on. My father joined that year, same year I entered the seminary. I've been vocation director for 9 years for the Diocese of Dallas, and then chaplain to all three of the Serra clubs of Dallas. So, well, there's a fourth one, the Young Serrans. I wasn't chaplain to them, so very familiar with the work of Serra. I've been to 12 international conventions, and just to thank you for the gift that you do in the work and the prayer that you do. I think of the Benedictine motto, prayer, or et labora, prayer and work, and you all do a beautiful job with that, and to keep that up and to encourage you that way. When I was in the vocation office, and I want to kind of rely on that, obviously taking time to interview the individuals that came, both men and women, looking in the possibility of vocation, trying to see, first of all, what brought them to that point. I know in some occasions they were newly professed Catholics. They had converted from other religions, and I found so many of them felt, well, the only way I can really convert is to be very involved, and the way I'm going to be involved is to be a priest or a nun. And it's like, well, you know, but that's a good thing, but at the same time, you need some type of getting your feet wet as just a day in and day out Catholic, so trying to direct them that way. Trying to see and foster their sense of spirituality, like both Sister and Father Henry were mentioning, seeing how they can get involved if they haven't already been involved in a parish community, get them involved, get them immersed into parish life so that they have that experience under them. To make sure there's a sense of prayer, that there's a daily life of prayer involved for them, getting them involved in different devotions, different spiritual readings. When I was vocation director once a month, we had a meeting for anybody in the diocese that was thinking about a vocation, and I had a religious order, a member of a religious order of men and a religious order of women speak every month in regards to the history of their order and what the charism of their order was about, so that they realized there's more than just a diocesan priest, that there are religious orders of women as well as of men that have different virtues and gifts that they offer to the community of the Church Universal, so that could give them an opportunity to see what lies within the life of the Catholic Church and the breadth of service that's there when you realize all that is offered through the various communities, diocesan as well as religious orders in that sense. Especially for the older ones, to be able to get them like a spiritual director. I had a list of priests and nuns that were willing to serve as spiritual directors, kind of spiritual guides for them, that were those that were closer to probably deciding on the gift of a vocation in their life at that point. So just those different types of approaches that would give them the opportunity of knowing whatever decision they made, at least it was a well-formed one, and that to the best of their ability, that they could feel good about once that decision is made, that this is at least what they felt was going to work for them at that present moment. Of course, in the fullness of time, that has to work out on their part, as well as on the discernment on the part of the church as well, in the different seminaries and convents that they might enter. So that was my experience there.
Okay, thank you. Next question or comment, opportunity for comment. What are some of the roadblocks that you found against encouraging people for a religious vocation? Some roadblocks, people or situations or whatever.
In some cases, from a number of the ones that I counseled, some of it obviously would be consumerism. So many of the young people are caught up in today's society of materialism, consumerism, that they don't give any thought other than that much of a chance, and hard to break from that. Sometimes lack of support in the families, especially for those who were converts. But I was amazed how many even Catholic families were reluctant in promoting that sense and fostering that sense of vocation to a number of them. I can remember there was two that come to my mind. Their families disinherited them. Catholic families disinherited them when they entered the seminary. They were just that against it for whatever reason. In that sense. Obviously, celibacy plays a part in that. Not everyone feels that they are able to commit for a lifelong term to not being married. Those are probably the biggest obstacles that I encountered at any rate. So I'll turn that over to Sister and Father Henry.
in my reflections, lack of good mental and emotional health related to family, growing up in a broken family. Even if there would be a lot of zeal or a lot of enthusiasm, they needed some growth in their emotional life, their personal life. I also put lack of good Catholic formation related to weak formation in their Catholic life, so not understanding their Catholic faith so well. And then I also put educational debt.
I grew up in a family of 4 brothers and 4 sisters, and I grew up on a farm. My mom and dad were the ones that always asked us in the evenings to kneel down. We all knelt down with chairs and everything else. I was maybe 10 or 11 at the time. Some of those times we prayed the rosary. And half the time I fell asleep in the middle of that rosary. And Dad would pick us up from the chairs and put us in bed. But it was that rosary regiment. It was that prayerfulness. Doesn't necessarily mean that has to happen today, but prayer in the family, lack of it can be an obstacle. And certainly the sacramental life of the church becomes very, very important, no matter how many you have in your family, whether it's 1 or 5 or more. Yes, the prayer life becomes important, and we learn really early to follow those sorts of things. One of the obstacles, obviously, that Father Tom and Sister and I all lived through was that made families hesitate to encourage vocations was that whole sexual pedophilia stuff that happened in the 90s and on up. And so that sense of not wanting to be branded with clergy that and inevitably it's just such a small percentage, but that's what people reflect on. The other obstacle that I've run across with young men or women that they don't think they're worthy to be a priest. They don't, I mean, they're sinning too much, basically. And so I'm not worthy. And I think the way that I break that up is I have a nice long talk with them about my personal life, and they feel a whole lot better. because if I could be a priest with all that past stuff, then surely they could, or even a nun. So those are the kinds of ways that you can break that up, to let them know you're human, to let them know that I'm human, and that I'm a sinner. I need to go to confession just like they do. Even as being a priest for 45 years, going to confession on a regular basis. Why do I do that? Because I need to.
Next question, Ernie. Next question.
I'm sorry.
Next question.
Another question, okay. Yes, I have one. When might you discourage a young person from pursuing a religious vocation?
I reflected that if I could tell that they needed time for personal growth or some kind of healing, I don't know if I would actually discourage them outright, or I haven't, but I would encourage them towards something that could bring them healing or whether it's counseling, whether it's some sort of program, or like we said, more involvement in parish life, just living the regular Catholic life. That's what I thought.
That's not an easy question to answer. We have to be very, very careful in discouraging people, but there are times I'm sure that we have to. Had I been with Jesus when he chose Peter, I might have said, look, wait a minute. Or when he chose Judas, I would certainly have had some second thoughts about that. Or Matthew, the tax collector, for crying out loud, you know. Look at the people Jesus chose. One betrayed him, one denied him, one doubted him, Thomas. And at first, all of them thought they wanted to sit at his right and his left when he came into his kingdom. You know? So if a young person comes up and says, you know, I want to be important, well, I don't know if I should discourage him from that. He will eventually find out, as I did, as Father Tom did, as Sister did, that, you know, there's a certain amount of humility that you've got to undertake to become a priest. There's a certain amount of humility you have to undertake when you become a married person. And so it's that, you know, can you sense in them some kind of willingness to grow, a willingness to learn? And there's nothing wrong with encouraging somebody to enter into seminary, because seminary is the testing ground for becoming a priest. And obviously, you know, I joined the seminary when I was a freshman in high school, way back in 1960. I was 14 years old. There were 64 of us that joined St. John's Seminary in San Antonio. By 68, or 64, from 60 to 64, 24 of us ended up graduating from St. John's Seminary and going on to Assumption Seminary or wherever. And then after that 1 year, then we went to Holy Trinity, because Holy Trinity came into existence with Jerome Hall. I was one of the pioneers at Holy Trinity Seminary, entering into it in my sophomore year. Then if you have 3 hours, I can tell you all my story, but that's where I stop.
I think it's a question not necessarily of discouraging, but encouraging them in their sense of discernment. If you feel like, when I was vocation director, you get a feel that some of these people were not entering for the right reason. So trying to work with them to get them to the point where they could have a more positive sense of discernment that would allow them to see, okay, is this for me? Is the seminary right for me? And then again, or the convent, because I dealt with young women as well. But trying to get them to see it needs to be for a right reason, even if they're coming before me, so to speak, for the wrong reason. I can think of a number that, in essence, I would say they felt like, well, I'm not that turned on by dating, so I guess the priesthood's for me. And it's like, well, that's not going to cut it. I can tell you my own story. When I was interviewed for the seminary, I had been dating the rector's niece. And then I'm sitting there for the final interview with 5 priests facing me, including the rector, and one of them asked, well, what's your dating experience like? And before I could open my mouth, the rector then just said, gentlemen, he dates my niece. Next question. So it's like, whew. But But trying to get them to understand even if, like I said, if it doesn't seem to be the right motivation, get them to the point where there can be a proper motivation and a much more positive motivation that would encourage them to consider the seminary or the convent. And there again, like Father Henry mentioned, and Sister too, that's the purpose of seminaries and convents, is to also help in the discernment process. So it's not just the seminarian or the novice or whatever discerning. The church has to discern, and that's what the seminary faculty is there for, is to discern on behalf of the church community as well. So it's a mutual discernment process. And so if we can get people to see what the right motivation might be for them, that hopefully would open them up even more so to a better sense of discernment on their part for what lies before them. Ernie, next question.
In your own personal preparation for the priesthood, what are some of the strategies you use to encourage yourself to pursue your vocation?
In my case, I had been accepted at Georgetown for the Foreign Service School already to enter the diplomatic corps. And it was an experience in the Sacrament of Reconciliation that started the process of turning me around to obviously what I did enter into. A lot of it is just openness of mind and heart. You know, being open to see what God wants for you and what God wants from you. You know, I sat there, and the vocation director at the time just determined that the curriculum at both Georgetown and at the University of Dallas, where our seminarians were prepared, was pretty much the same, so I had nothing to lose by entering. But once I entered, it was like I still went through a process of having to discern, even by the time of my sophomore year, what would be my major. You know, was the seminary still for me? I was still thinking about, you know, the Foreign Service School. I got permission to finally major in history, so by the time so I had to do a double major and a minor. And so by the time of my senior year, I wasn't still too sure, but working more in depth, I realized things had kind of coasted my way, but I hadn't made an in-depth decision. And so I thought, let me give it one more year and really go in depth with my spiritual director to determine what my future would be. And I guess it's somewhat obvious, or I wouldn't be here today, but that's kind of how I had to approach it in that sense.
All right. Well, now I do have to tell some of my story. So I entered the seminary when I was 14 years old. I was in a small parish. I don't know if anybody knows where Abbott, Texas is. Abbott is a very small town. About the population was 90, counting chickens, dogs, everything else. We lived on a farm real close to that. That was in Hill County. I was actually born in West, which is McLennan County, the home of the Czech kolaches and all that stuff, and I'm full-blooded Czech. But we lived on a farm in Hill County, and my discernment had a lot to do with the priest that was there, Father Wenceslas Pechal. He was the life of the party. I mean, he made everybody laugh, and every time we went to any activities, well, I loved his homilies because they were so relatable, and et cetera. And so it was just really a good experience. And you know what? As a 14-year-old, 12, 13, 14-year-old, I looked at this Father Pechal and said, I want to be like that. He's popular, you know? Everybody loves him. We come home from Mass, and Mom and Dad are talking about Father Pechal, and they just love him. I said, man, I want to be loved like that. And so that's what got me in the seminary. And in the 4 years, they don't even have minor seminaries anymore, for good reason, I'm sure. But I entered there. I went through the 4 years at St. John's, went into Assumption Seminary for a year. Then we went to Holy Trinity Seminary. And in my third year in that seminary and at University of Dallas. I'm majoring in philosophy. I'm discerning myself out of the seminary. I'm not happy anymore. I see everything on the other side of the fence is much more attractive to me now, like girls, you know. And so I was discerning myself out. In that third year, I quit the seminary. We were living in Dallas by then, so I was going back and forth from East Dallas, St. Pius X Parish, to University of Dallas. I stayed with philosophy because I liked philosophy, and I was doing fine, and I only had a year and a half to go to finish. And I had to start paying my own tuition, which was going to be very expensive at the University of Dallas, even back then. I finished that, and then I got Vietnam War was very heavy back then, and so in '68 I graduated with a philosophy degree, and I would have been drafted. So I wanted a better choice so I chose to join the Air Force, and join the Air Force, and so that maybe I could. I didn't want to go to Vietnam. You know, a whole lot of people didn't want to go to Vietnam for good reasons, and so. Long story short, I ended up with 2.5 years at Carswell Air Force Base in Fort Worth. I was dating, got close to marriage a couple of times, but then I got moved to the Philippines, Clark Air Base, and for 18-month period. During that time, I wanted to stay out of trouble, you know, etc. And so I went to see the 2 Catholic chaplains on base. There were like 20,000 dependents on that Clark Air Base, and we had a Catholic community there. And I said, you know, I was working in supply, in funds management. There were 3 of us. We could take turns. Might be the Pope. But I'll call him later. We could take turns working. So I didn't have a lot to do there. So I went to the chaplains there, and they put me to work. I started teaching 8th grade CCD. I was the moderator for the CYO, which had 30 kids in it. I led the 5 o'clock mass with my guitar, and those same 30 kids went in the CYO. We went to mass every Saturday and sang the songs. We had a kind of a folk mass. That was the way it was in the 60s and late 60s and early 70s. And so I joined the Knights of Columbus, and I went all the way through 4th degree with the Knights. I made a cursillo there, which is a leadership retreat, and got involved with the families of those teenagers that I was working with. And I was even dating dependents when I was there at Clark. But it kept me off base, and it kept me out of trouble, where all the other servicemen were going. I was going to the families of these teenagers and enjoying their company. But those 2 chaplains kept telling me, You need to go back into the seminary. And I said, no, no way, no way. But it kept coming back to me, so that when I finally went back, the first time when I was 14, I ran up the stairs of that seminary in San Antonio. I was so excited. The second time, I said, you know what, Lord, I'm going to give this 1 year at a time, because I don't know, I'm not sure yet, but I'm sure that I need to discern, and the best place for me to discern is in the seminary. So I backed up the stairs of Holy Trinity Seminary to talk to the rector, Msgr Jerry Hughes, and he welcomed me with open arms, and 1 year led to 2 to 3. So I went from 60 to 64 at high school seminary, from 64 to 68 at University of Dallas, part-time seminary, part-time not, toward the end, and then 4 years with the Air Force, and then 4 years back in theology at Holy Trinity Seminary, and I was ordained in 1976. And my first assignment was in Tyler, when Tyler was part of this diocese, at Immaculate Conception in Grand Prairie, where Monsignor Milam Joseph was the pastor and still one of my best friends. And I was there for 4 years. That's my story. Some of it.
Hearing those stories, I forgot the question. But I think the key word is strategy, right? For myself, what was my strategy? I think I will say that I was raised in this diocese, in the Diocese of Dallas, over in Richardson. St. Paul the Apostle was my elementary school. And then I went to Bishop Lynch High School. And my family really fostered Catholic education, but not so strong on like prayer life, like Father talked about, the strong prayer life in the family. So my parents suffered a divorce, and of course I suffered in it too. So I think when I was a young person in college age, I had an emptiness that wanted to be filled or healed. And so when I met some young women who were religious, and they're about my age, I guess the spark was, I want to do whatever I can do for Jesus and his church to strengthen family life, to help people really get their Catholic faith and not just have it all in their head, which is where I had it before. So my strategy was, I don't want any other young person to have to suffer, not only suffered the divorce, but my siblings left the church, and that was I think that was more painful than the divorce, just because we were all raised Catholic, and I thought, why are they leaving? Look, I mean, it was just very painful. So I thought, if my strategy is anything, can I do something about this? And that's what I think I've tried to do with my life, is to bring healing in some way, and bring people to really know and love their Catholic faith, and not just go through the motions. That's my strategy.
Good. I think you can extract a lot of what I'm going to mention now from what the totality of what the responses have been. We did ask for how would you discourage a vocation, but I'd like to just lump together the joys. And I know, as I said, I think you can extract from what they've said about their joys about being a priest or religious. But if I could just pull them all together in one lump sum, the joys of a vocation, a religious vocation. You want to take it further, Tom? Oh, either one.
Well, believe it or not, some of the joys that I experience in the activities of being a priest, in the sacramental life of being a priest, one of the joys is being able to give absolution and confession. It's a very special privilege and honor, and it's a humbling experience to be able to listen to someone really just kind of strip themselves and humble themselves enough to speak their weaknesses, their sins, and to be able to listen to that, and then to be able to tell them that God loves them anyway, and God loves them every way and unconditionally, and to be able to give them absolution, those beautiful words of absolution. But the other, obviously, and all the other sacraments, the Eucharist obviously is something that is very special, that is a gift that we can give to one another as we enter into that communal celebration that makes us one body and one life. But the other parts of that is that we can still do all those things that help us to enter into family life with one another, and to form relationships with one another, whether it's with brother priests and sisters, or whether it's with families, visiting with them in their homes, celebrating their. I live at St. Joseph Village, and there's a couple there, Jay and Colleen Bednars, that celebrated their 65th wedding anniversary. They're both in their mid-80s. And I have had a long-time relationship with them because they used to be presenters for the marriage encounter, and I was also a presenter as a priest, and we did marriage encounters together. And so we go way back, and we're reestablishing our relationship. They asked me if I could renew their vows yesterday in the chapel, and that's what I did. I prayed with them and gave them a blessing, blessed their rings. Colleen didn't have her original ring because it just got worn out, and but Jay did have his original ring, and I blessed them again. I blessed her ring, and I blessed his. It's a joy to be with people who have, they had, I think they have like 6 children, and they probably have 48 great-grandchildren and great-grandchildren all together, counting their children. So they have to have a big old hall like this to have a family reunion. But to it just, there's all sorts of different things. I know I'm missing a lot of different things, but I'm just going to let somebody else have it. But that's some of the joy that I've experienced. I can look back and I can say, thank you, Lord, for placing me in parishes that I loved, parishes that I found joy in. Yeah, challenging sometimes, and sometimes very difficult, but I look back on all those parishes that I've been in, and I say, what a blessing, what a joy to have entered into the lives of these people and give them something of myself, and certainly give them all of who Christ is.
I'm going to say the joy of when people get it, when they get their Catholic faith, when they go deeper, when they have an experience in prayer, when it moves from the head to the heart. That's the biggest joy for me, to experience that or to hear them say that.
I would think I do a lot with spiritual direction, and kind of the same thing Sister just said, when you see people get it. and kind of realize, oh, okay, there again, from head to heart is a beautiful moment. There's a French Dominican, Laquadere. He has a poem, one line or a couple lines of which say, to be a member of every, it's on the priesthood, to be a member of every family, yet belonging to none. And as a priest, as a religious, I've seen that borne out so many times. Yes, we don't have our own family, but the privilege and the pleasure to be able to be welcomed into the different family units and family homes that we have been has been such a blessing and such a joy. I have 32 godchildren. I have, that I'm aware of, I have that, well, no, I mean, this part, that I'm aware of, I have 7 that have been named after me, that people have told me at any rate, but just moments like that that allow you a sense of intimacy in a whole different way than, you know, as married couples might experience it, but it's a love nonetheless. And it's a love born out of the fruit of exercising our sense of relationship with the person of Jesus and a relationship to his people.
Thank you. That was-
I'm just going to ask, how many you have in the seminary, how many fathers do you have in the seminary right now, and how many novices and postulants do you have in studying?
Father Edwin, how many do we have in the seminary right now? 72. For the Diocese of Dallas. Yes, indeed. Sister?
We have 4 novices and 2 postulants, and hopefully our House of Discernment will get going again after the pandemic, and we'll have more affiliates.
Go ahead, Dick.
Okay, are there any other questions? Yes, Mike.
Fathers, you talked about Jesus' selection of the apostles and how it was kind of questionable if you look at their resumes. And one thing that I've noticed is that, at least in my diocese, I'm from Iowa, there's a pretty high focus on academic acumen in the selection process for seminarians. And I've often wondered in my heart if that's a good criteria for what makes a good priest. And I don't really understand, I've never asked anybody before why that's true, and maybe you have some thoughts on it.
I think Father Edwin would be a better one to ask that question. But I don't know. There are different seminaries that we send people to. University of Dallas is academically it's got got high expectations, but there are some other seminaries that we can send them to that is not as high, and that happens too. So, but I don't know. I don't know how else to answer that, except that we certainly do take into consideration because there are some expectations about but then you hear stories of a curé of ours and the difficulty he had in seminary, and then we also hear stories of certain dioceses that turn somebody down because of that expectation of high academic prowess, and they go to another diocese and are ordained and become very good priests. So I don't know. I'm with you, and in some of that there needs to be some leeway in that area.
One thought that I had was, I think we would agree that the people that we meet on a day-to-day contact and the people that we think might be worthy of pursuing a religious vocation are very sharp people. They're smart, they're educated, they're very savvy technologically, and so in order to meet people where they are, I think they've got to increase the mental, the acumen or training that's expected.
Well, I don't know about being sharp with. I mean, I would need a 3-year-old child to help me do some of my stuff on my phone, like put it on silent and things like that.